But Peter Khalil, the inner North Melbourne Labor MP, has been given a special job as envoy for social cohesion. Good morning.
Morning, Raf. How are you?
I'm okay. What does that title mean to you?
Well, it's a very good question because I think the cohesive part of society is the way that, or the different parts of society actually form together towards a united whole. And so what does that mean? It really goes to how people are interconnected throughout our society, what common goals we have, what kind of common ground we have, how do we disagree peacefully? But I guess it's important to note too, it's not just about multiculturalism or religious or ethnic background. It's much broader than that because we have intergenerational difference, we've got socioeconomic differences, people have different political perspectives. And it's important that I think the thread that kind of threads through our society, which is our being Australian, our citizenship, the obligations, the responsibilities, the privileges that adhere to that, is kind of the thread of that element of cohesiveness. And that doesn't mean that we're always going to agree, but what are the policies that we need to put in place to build up the institutions that people can have trust in, whether it's democratic institutions, whether it's the media, and what role does government play in making sure there is that cohesiveness in society? So basically people can fulfill their potential, we avoid conflict, and we have a coherent society as well. It makes sense to people. And I think that's the kind of role. It cuts across government, frankly. Yeah. It's not just one policy area.
How do you think we're going for social cohesion right now?
Oh, there are many, many challenges we're facing. Obviously, the issues that are happening internationally, the war in Gaza, there are issues around social media, the fragmentation of media. There are issues around the way that, people are actually disseminating misinformation and disinformation, which diminishes that cohesiveness of our society. The way that we disagree has become more polarized. And there is also a challenge from the fact that there is a distrust in our institutions, our democracy, our media, and so on. And these institutions are made up of people, Raf. It's made up of you and me. We all have an obligation and responsibility to lift that confidence by being competent, by actually doing good work. And I think that's an important understanding because institutions don't just stand there, they're not just buildings. No.
Can I ask, and I want to ask this question with genuine respect, but also acknowledging there's a genuine difference between your party and the Greens over policy on the war in Gaza, and then I suspect there's also a genuine difference over what your party and the Greens think is okay in terms of political protest. Plus, your office has been targeted by things that you genuinely feel are unacceptable. Like that's a tough call to put you in charge of the social cohesion if you're on the fault line of the disagreement, isn't it?
Well, first of all, social cohesion is not just about an international conflict where there is protests and so on. It is much broader than that. It is really about the kind of shaping of our society to allow people to have the best possible quality of life. And Australia, I think, frankly, when you compare to other jurisdictions, we've had a relatively harmonious society. We have our challenges. There are many challenges that we're facing, and it's important to get those policy settings right. With regard to protest, Raf, I have said very publicly, peaceful protest is a fundamental right, a democratic right of every Australian citizen. Every Australian has a right to protest, as long as it's peaceful, as long as it doesn't step over the line into violence or physical harassment or intimidation or hate speech. People have a right to protest. And politics is a contest of ideas. And parties have different views about things and how they implement policies and what their philosophical framework is. I mean, for my part, I have been very clear and very publicly about my position on this particular issue. I've spoken even before 7th of October about Palestinian statehood and Palestinian self-determination. I'm Egyptian background, so my family's been involved in that for many, many decades. My father, my grandfathers, my uncles actually were in the Egyptian army and fought many of the wars of the 20th century. So I've always been a big supporter of Palestinian statehood. I believe in a two-state solution. And with respect to what we've seen, I've also said very clearly that I think Australia should play a constructive and substantive role in creating a Palestinian state.
Can I interrupt in one part of that, Peter? Only that, I mean, and I appreciate you taking up the task, but again, genuine question. It's tricky for you. You might feel genuinely that fake bodies of children wrapped in bloody sheets outside your office, I mean, that's not a violent form of protest. That might be a sort of protest that you feel is sort of breaches some other convention or rule, but that puts you in a really difficult spot to promote social cohesion while you're on the fault line of one of the things that's dividing us, doesn't it? When you don't agree on a protest like that?
I would have thought the opposite, Raf.
Okay.
When you experience the different challenges that, and we've experienced it, obviously my staff have experienced it, the physical harassment. I actually had staff members having to be escorted by police because some of the protests got a bit physically harassing. So when you experience that, there's a real understanding of the challenges that we face and how do we unite people? How do we bring people together? And by the way, this is something I've been working on for decades. Even before politics, I was a Victorian Multicultural Commissioner. I worked for SBS, which brings people together through our multicultural society and so on. It's a really important part of it. It's one of those institutions that I was talking about earlier. So I've been very passionate about this policy area for a long time, and I've been thinking about it for a long time and talking to the Prime Minister about it a long time. And I actually think it's really important that we get these settings right, because what we want to do is make sure that we enhance that cohesiveness of our society. We give people that opportunity to fulfill their potential. People can disagree, but let's find the way to disagree effectively and peacefully and respectfully. And I think that's a really important. And everything is so polarised now with the fragmentation of media and politics and so on. Is there a better way, a more decent way that we can find to disagree with each other and to engage with each other so that we can maximise our opportunities and our potential? That, to me, is what I think this role allows. And it's a great privilege to be able to do it, to try and help us enhance and protect our multicultural communities, but also our democratic institutions.
Peter Khalil's with us. He is the new envoy for social cohesion, part of Anthony Albanese's government. He's the Labor MP for the seat of Wills. Peter, is the move of Claire O'Neill away from Home Affairs and Andrew Giles away from immigration, is that a recognition that the government needed to respond to problems with those portfolios?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't characterise it like that. We haven't had a reshuffle for 2 years. It's been a very stable government. That's very unusual. I don't think there's been governments that have lasted that long without a reshuffle in recent memory.
I'm not saying they're not capable, but it's a recognition that things weren't working?
The first point I would make is, and I'm the chair of the Intelligence Committee, and I'd worked very closely with Claire, for example, the work that she had done repairing a portfolio, a department that was overly politicised, overly securitised under the coalition for 10 years has been exemplary. She's put policies forward to strengthen democracy, to protect critical infrastructure, revamped cyber security and cyber defence, which has been a big challenge for Australia and across the world. She's done a terrific job in that and very difficult circumstances. So she's now moving to a very important portfolio in housing and homelessness, which is an economic portfolio and critically important to implement our policies around housing affordability, which is really critical to intergenerational issues and fairness as well. So she's got a big job to do. And Andrew Giles, as Immigration Minister, he did all of that work to remove TPVs and CHEVs, temporary protection visas. So some 20,000 refugees and asylum seekers who were in limbo now have moved towards permanent residency and citizenship.
But isn't it just realistic you can say they've done all that good work, isn't it just realistic to concede that the government's better off if you now have different people dealing with those issues?
Well, I wouldn't characterise it like that. I think the Prime Minister said very clearly this is an opportunity to refresh. It's been 2 years. He's refreshing and recharging, I guess, revitalising the cabinet. Tony Burke's coming in, and one good thing is obviously immigration is going into cabinet. I've always argued, Raf, that immigration was overly securitised and should be in cabinet, and it is more of an economic and social public policy area that's such an important part of our immigration policy, and same with multicultural affairs. So removing that kind of securitization of it, I think, is a really good step.
You're the envoy for social cohesion. The federal government has named an envoy on anti-Semitism. I think the government's casting around for an envoy on Islamophobia. Do you know when that appointment will be made? Is that weeks or months away?
I don't know the exact date. I know the Prime Minister said the other day that would be announced fairly soon. Both of those envoys are obviously they're different in the sense that they're outside the parliamentary process,
Sure.
but they're important because they work with those communities. There's been a rise in Islamophobia, a rise in anti-Semitism. This is a real issue around cohesion as well, and the way that we treat each other. So I think they're important roles because they work with those communities. I'm not sure exactly when the announcements are made, but they're important elements in this process.
Appreciate your time this morning, Peter Khalil. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Raf.
Peter Khalil's the new envoy for social cohesion. He's also the Labor MP for the Cedar Wills.